All right, welcome. So for the past 4 sessions, we've been talking about the 5 ranks, which means we've arrived at rank 5. So Dongshan wrote these 5 poems to express the 5 stages of enlightenment. And Genpo Roshi is a teacher in our lineage who is a little bit famous for having created something called the idea of big mind and small mind. And he called this like the great heart. So the idea is that the big mind is the absolute and the small mind is the relative. So the absolute is like oneness, connection to everything, and it's sometimes called emptiness. And emptiness is tricky because there's the emptiness of merging with everything, right? And then there's the emptiness of like, I used to have hair and now I don't. Right? And so things have no fixed nature, but they're still things. And the absolute is the unity of all the things. Does that make sense? But he called that a great heart, which I love. This notion that the big mind, the universal mind, is the absolute, and our small day-to-day mind is the relative, and that if we're unifying those things and practicing with them, then that requires a great heart, because it does. Because it's almost impossible to go deep in this practice and not open our hearts. And once we start to feel, then that's a doorway to profound insight and awakening, but it's also quite challenging. We all beings want to move away from discomfort, and humans too want to move away from uncomfortable feelings. And then we live in a world which encourages that, and in fact offers like many exit ramps of all descriptions to move away from how we feel internally all the time. And so I'm of the view that it is a radical choice to move toward our authentic interior life, and that this practice then becomes almost a countercultural movement just by doing it, just by sitting on a cushion and saying, what's going on in there? And then staying with it, having the strength to stay with it when what comes up isn't peaceful. So, Dongshan is talking about the 5 ranks of enlightenment, and he's now talking about the 5th one, which is called unity attained. And we're going to see if we can figure out what that means. Like, what does it mean to attain unity? Because on the one hand, there's a ladder to climb. People have different, levels of experience and practice, and there's students and senior students, and there's monks and there's teachers, and so there's levels to this thing, and there's people who are beginning koan study, and there's people who have completed koan study, and so, like, on the level of forms, right? Like, there's ladders to climb, but yet we're climbing ladders to attain something we already have. So what is that about, right? And I think a lot of what that's about is finding skillful ways to work with and develop experience with working with what is, right? With what it means to be human. And so I'll read you the poem and then we'll kind of talk about the different parts. And I'm going to adjust the pronouns to be gender neutral. So it says, who dares equal them? Who falls into neither being nor non-being, right? So who dares equal them who falls into neither being nor non-being? Right? So being is like stuff, right? Non-being is everything, right? Where the self dissolves and oneness appears. All people want to leave the current ordinary life. But they, after all, come back to sit among the coals and ashes. So this is a very interesting poem when we're talking, like, isn't this the finish line? Isn't this, like, this is one of the greatest masters of, Zen literature, history, teaching, the final expression in poetry of the highest level of enlightenment. And it says, everyone wants to leave the current of ordinary life. but after all, they come back to sit among the coals and ashes. Wait, what? So even the masters want to leave the current of ordinary life, but they come back anyway? That's the highest level? I love it, because it's true, right? This is how we discover there's nothing wrong with us. You're sitting there on the cushion and you're wanting to leave the current of ordinary life. You're wanting to leave the difficult situation or the embarrassment or the feeling of shame or the anger or the problems with your parents or the job with the boss that's difficult, right? Because let's face it, there's plenty of good things in the world, but the good things aren't what drive us to the cushion, at least not at first. Right? What drives us to sit is like, well, I've got all this baggage. I got this stuff. I'm coping with things. It's hard. And so, when I saw the words unity attained and I was a beginner at this, I really thought like, well, that unity must be some kind of mountaintop unity moment. And there are profound moments, but like that then just becomes another thing. Right? Well, it's like, where if I can just get the mountaintop moment and stay there, then I'll finally leave the current of ordinary life. But there's two problems with that. One is it's not possible, right? You can't stay there because everything is impermanent and all states of mind are impermanent, which is great news if the state you're in is unpleasant. It will pass. But also if you're in a mountaintop state, it will pass. So you don't get to leave the current of ordinary life, but you do get to come back and then be among the coals and ashes, and then that can be profound, right? Cease from evil, practice good for others. And one thing I'll speak for myself, one thing I notice is that when I'm practicing good for others, I feel more alive than at any other time. And if I'm really strongly feeling like I want to leave the current of ordinary life and I go toward being of benefit to others, frequently that feeling passes. And so then the unity that we're attaining is unity with what is. That's the highest level. And it's also available right now, right? Unity with what is. The master is able to, with greater ease, accord with what is present, right? Because there's no other place to go. And like, hear me on this. Like, there's no other place. Like the good news and the bad news are the same news. There's nowhere to go, right? The suffering is here. The feelings are here, right? The place where we practice is here. We wake up to ourselves. We become enlightened. We become aware, we find wisdom here, right? We help others here, right? We want to leave here. All of it is here. Everything else is just escapism. And what's so profound about this way is that it is about, if it were bodybuilding, right? The muscle that we're building is the ability to just work with what's here. And so then that kind of begs the question, like, well, what is here? And it's like, well, what's here is essentially two things, right? All of your past karmic causes and conditions, all of your stuff, right? You show up and you have all this content, right? Like a few minutes ago before we started the talk, I was chatting about my Dharma name, right? It's just Fuso, it means no conflict. And so my teacher gave me a name that was related to some of my past karma where there was conflict. And he wanted to remind me to let go of the conflict. And so that's something I brought to the cushion. And you all bring things too. Your own stuff. And it goes back forever, right? Because the people who influenced you were influenced by the people who influenced them. And it's like, where's the fault, right? What generation do we point our finger at? Because those people were influenced by the people before them, and this causes and the conditions and the social situations and the society, all the things. It's all here. And so, Dogen says that, uses the word practice enlightenment. Dogen is the Japanese Zen master who brought Zen from China to Japan. And he used a word that means practice enlightenment, right? So the idea is that the practice of practicing is enlightenment. And that's what I'm sort of aiming at here, right? When we sit down and we are at one with what is, that's unity. Like, that's it. Like, you're doing it here. And becoming the master Zen student, right? The expert Zen student, the senior Zen student, is one who has become increasingly adept at just sitting with that stuff. I think it was last week or the week before that I said, to make it a 10, right? And what I meant by that is, when you feel something, do you have the courage to actually go in and look at it, and like shine the light on it? And it's called turning the light around. Like, what is in there? And it requires incredible strength, right? It's not trivial. And it's warriorship, right? Like, it's one thing to sit and say, okay, I'm going to be at peace. I'm going to induce a state of peace upon myself, right? Now you're just forcing it. But on the other hand, if you can be at peace with, like, unity attained is, I can be at peace when I'm terribly distraught. Because there is one who is not distraught. Does that make sense? Have you experienced that? Like as the distraughtness goes by, as the tears fall, we're out of the way and those energies are moving through the body. All of this is in the body. Right? There is in there also one who is not in distress. And it can become this joyful thing of like, I can sit here and I can freely cry. I can freely express. That's liberation. Like, I'm not bound up, by societal norms or by gender norms or by, expectations from my family or my partners or my kids or my boss. And then I become free to play with all of that. And if I want to, put on a particular version of myself for a particular situation to be skillful and to support others and to move through the world successfully, I can do that. But it doesn't mean anything, right? I'm not sacrificing, my true self, because there is no fixed self. So there's no, there's no fixed version. There's a lot of talk these days about, like, I want to draw healthy boundaries. And some people think, well, like, I want to be my true self, so I'm going to draw my boundaries so I can be who I am. What I would say is, you want to draw boundaries so that you're safe enough to be whoever you need to be based on circumstances, and have enough space and calm and quiet to discover what that is. Because there's no fixed you. I wrote a comment on this, which is, I said, as is natural, the enlightened person responds to conditions, not falling into either side. Right? The two sides would be, that I either fall into the side of, like, I'm just gonna, sit here and be at peace and not worry about any of that, right? And the other side is like, totally fixated on form. Like, I have to, if I do the service perfectly, then everything's good, If I, adjust all the dials of my life perfectly, then everything will be fine, right? If I have the right job and the right partner and the right pets and the right kid, it'll all be perfect, right? So the enlightened person responds to conditions, not falling into either side, not avoiding, not overly embracing. Everyone moves toward pleasure and away from discomfort. The master too suffers, but returns to the world, to the uncomfortable place, to help others, because there's literally no other place, nor was there ever another place. So as Zen students, that's what we do. We're students of the way, and the way is the path of reality, right? And that's it. It's the fifth stage, unity attained. What is unity? unity with what is. And then also, when we fall away, right? When we fall into ignorance, when we fall into greed, when we fall into anger, when we fall into confusion, when we fall into attachment, just notice and come back. Because we're unified with that too, right? We're unified with our humanness. We're unified with the fact that we don't always show up the same. Unity with what is outside, with what is inside, with their non-separation. That's the path of Zen. There's many paths, but that's what this path is asking. Can you sit? Can you come to the cushion right here where everything is and be in it and not look away? It requires profound courage, and I applaud you for having that courage.